All right, what is pilot flying and what is pilot monitoring? Let's start right from the basics. In a two-crew airplane, so that's an airplane that requires two pilots, you have in the left-hand seat a captain and on the right-hand seat a first officer. And now because in a typical day you'll be flying multiple sectors or multiple legs, you want to have it fair where it's not only the captain flying and the first officer handling the radios, etc. So you want to switch flying duties, and that way you also keep up with the recurrency of the takeoff and landings. So that's why we have terminologies called pilot flying, PF for short, or pilot monitoring, PM for short. The pilot flying can be a captain or a first officer, does not matter. It's the person who's in charge of controlling and flying the airplane, and the pilot monitoring does everything else. In fact, the pilot flying has the easiest job. Flying the airplane is actually quite simple, quite easy. It's the pilot monitoring who has their plate full. Let's start off by looking at more specifically as to what the pilot flying does. You only have one job as a pilot flying, and that's to fly the airplane. Now, what do I mean by fly the airplane? We've all heard this term before, fly the airplane, fly the airplane, fly the airplane. What it specifically means is that at all times, you must keep your altitude, your heading, your airspeed completely under control of what you want it to be, and navigate the airplane from point A to point B safely. Stay within the safe altitudes, always stay on the protected airspace, and fly the airplane safely. What the pilot flying does not do is talk to ATC. What the pilot flying does not do is to cross-check any of the other stuff. You really have to focus majority of your time on flying the airplane. Yes, you can take a quick glance to cross-check just for a second or two, but any major cross-checking, that's all pilot monitoring, which leads us into what the pilot monitoring does. The pilot monitoring you can think of does everything else that the pilot flying does not do, including helping the pilot flying when he or she delegates something to you, such as maybe the pilot flying might say to you to adjust or fine-tune the power on the takeoff, or maybe adjust the heading bug. You can do those things if you're delegated to do so by the pilot flying. You'll be setting up the approach, so you'll be tuning the frequencies, putting in the minimums. You'll be doing the emergency procedure, such as shutting down the engine during the engine failure procedure. The pilot flying is just controlling the aircraft during this time, but as a pilot monitoring, you will be shutting down the airplane engine. As well as you'll be monitoring the overall systems of the aircraft to make sure all the buttons and switches are in place. You will be monitoring the progress of the flight by noting down your times on the flight plan. As a pilot monitoring, you actually have quite an important job to do. Now, that being said, regardless of what your duties are, whether you are pilot flying or pilot monitoring, you both are responsible if the other person messes up. That goes without saying. If one person crashes the airplane, guess what? You're in the cockpit with them and you both go down together. So it's in your best interest to trap those errors and manage them accordingly by bringing it up to the surface. And that way you save the day and you look good to the instructor. For the purpose of the sim eval, the pilot flying will always be the first officer sitting in the right-hand seat, the first officer seat, and the pilot monitoring will be sitting in the left-hand seat, which is the captain's seat. And it depends on the instructors. Sometimes they'll make the aircraft land and then you switch seats so that you can see both pilots flying the aircraft, or they might just make you fly from the wrong seat, from the pilot monitoring seat, and then in that case now you become the pilot flying. So it just depends on the instructor. But generally for the sim eval, as the pilot flying, you are sitting in the first officer seat.